firstly, let me welcome my dear friend, Professor Muqtedar Khan, University of Delaware. Dr. Khan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Professor Mahavir, and I'm absolutely delighted to be with you again, and I congratulate you for your second seminar for a center which is so young to be able to host international webinars on these critical topics. It is really admirable, and I really wish you all the best for your center as you develop it. I'm also happy to be here with some of the friends, especially Saeed.
Recording in progress.
Especially Saeed Sadek and Bharati, both of whom are very good friends of mine, and everybody else in the audience. Thank you for joining today. I'm going to basically not use 30 minutes of my time. I will make 5 points that I think are critical since my last presentation here about 3 weeks ago. So the first point that I want to make is that the war is in its 34th, on its 34th day, and it is the most interesting thing or most striking thing to me is the United States isolation both internationally and at home. So it may sound a bit, shall we say, odd to say the United States is isolated, but if you actually look at the positions that the US is taking, and if you look at the positions that the international community is taking on this issue, you will find that the United States stands alone as a bulwark of anything and everything that Israel does, and also as something that is acting as an advocate of Israel in the international community, as a sponsor of this war, by providing, I think by now we've already sent about $500 million worth of weapons, and the Congress has passed another bill with $14.5 billion in aid to Israel. So the first point in terms of explaining how the US is isolated, it is only the US which is giving money and aid to Israel in this war, which is about close to $15 billion. Committed and already transferred. Lots of weapons of transfer. Some of the weapons have been transferred in a manner which are irregular and inconsistent with the US laws, which has prompted the senior most person in weapons transfer in the State Department, Josh Paul, to resign from the State Department and trying to bring attention to the irregularities of Joe Biden's policy on weapons transfer. So the US is the only country which is at the moment transferring weapons and providing tremendous aid. A little bit came from Rishi Sunak, but not the manner in which he came with a plane load of weapons. And I think that was more of a photo op than anything else for Rishi Sunak himself, who will soon be facing elections at home. But if you look at the United Nations, we witnessed the General Assembly essentially voting 120, calling for a ceasefire and voting against the US positions. In the Security Council, the United States again finds itself alone, using its veto. Even its allies, Britain, has abstained, not used its veto. It would have been redundant, but Britain did not feel the need to stand with US while US is standing with Israel in the Security Council. And the positions that France has taken in the Security Council, France is an important member of the G7, have not been entirely consistent with the positions that the US has taken. Even today there is a major conference in Paris that took place to provide humanitarian aid to Gaza. They are trying to raise $1.2 billion. So most of the heads of states of the European Union's countries and some Arab nations participated in this Paris summit. And the first thing that Macron did at this summit was to call for an immediate ceasefire. This is exactly a position which is in opposition to the position that the United States has taken, that calling for a ceasefire is basically giving Hamas an opportunity to reconstitute itself and escape what Israel is doing. At the G7, we just concluded the G7 meeting in Japan, where the foreign ministers met. Blinken, when he went there, he tried a lot to ensure that G7 came out with a consensus position. But if you look at the G7's consensus position, they talk a lot more about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Of course, they start with it's like a normal thing to say, yes, Israel has a right to defend itself, and within the confines of international law. But then onwards, it's all criticism of what's going on in Gaza, highlighting the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and also insisting that there has to be post-crisis efforts made to renew the peace process and the two-state solution. And you can see very clearly that this is not exactly the kind of statement that the US wanted. So you have to look at the composition of G7 and ask yourself, who is it that is putting pressure on the US to such an extent that at the end of the G7, Blinken comes out of the meeting, not only talks about humanitarian pauses, which, by the way, have come through. Joe Biden has announced that Israel will be giving 4-hour humanitarian pauses in the northern part of the Gaza between its assaults. So it will stop killing Gazans for 4 hours, then it will resume killing Gazans after some aid is provided. But Blinken then called, basically, it was very interesting. He rejected the idea that Netanyahu announced on ABC 2 days ago, that the end game is basically unending, indefinite Israeli occupation of Gaza. So Blinken basically said, no, we are completely opposed to Gaza. We can understand that there is some transition period, but they want self-governance in Gaza. So at least on this one issue, Blinken is able to somehow relocate his backbone, which during the travel, all his travel over the Middle East, he probably had forgotten it somewhere. But ultimately, he found some parts of his backbone in Tokyo and took a very strong position that Israel should not occupy Gaza. And then, of course, insistence on the humanitarian pauses. So you can see that that on even tactical issues, broader issues, the United States and the rest of the world do not stand eye to eye. Several countries have started withdrawing their ambassadors from Israel. And so the US is struggling to keep the world on the side of Israel. The second thing is that Israel is losing, or has nearly lost, all the sympathy that it gained internationally on October 7th, when Hamas and its horrendous terrorist attacks, which killed 1,400 people, a lot of them civilians, and some of the brutality with which Hamas conducted itself over several hours, raping women, killing children, etc. There was a groundswell of support and sympathy for Israel on October 7th, and it seems that since then all of that has dissipated as the world watches in horror the indiscriminate killing. Over 10,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza. Over 4,000 children have been killed, and this argument that these are collateral damages, it is unbelievable. The whole world will have to lose its humanity if it cannot even say that killing children and civilians is a bad thing. Just as terrorism cannot be justified, I think widespread massacre of civilians, women, children, not only massacre of children and lives, but also destruction of civilian facilities like hospitals and ambulances, etc., cannot be condoned, and they cannot be justified in any way. So the second observation that I want to make is that Israel is losing, and you can see that also in protests. The protest in London over the weekend, and another one coming out this weekend, is unbelievable. Thousands and thousands and thousands. There are some people out there who think that these are just Muslim immigrants in Europe and the West. That is not the case. Over the weekend, we had protests in Washington, D.C. By some estimates, 300 to 400,000. These are very big protests for Western countries, huge. And I was delighted that several students from University of Delaware had driven down to participate in the protests. People are flying across the country to participate in protests. And one of the biggest constituents are young Jewish Americans who participated and led and spoke at this event. So there is a groundswell of opposition and protest all over the Western countries. You can see that in Paris, you can see it in London, you can see it in Washington, D.C., in Boston, and elsewhere. Universities in America, especially the Ivy League universities, are all standing very firmly with Palestine. Some of the students at Harvard, etc. So the best and the brightest in America and from the world are not with Israel on that. Israel is finding itself increasingly losing the publicity battle on this issue. But one of the most interesting things to this is the dissent in the State Department itself. There's a huge protest and uproar going on in the US State Department because area experts are being isolated, and Blinken and Biden are not consulting with State Department experts on technical issues like weapons transfer, like humanitarian aid, like refugees. So basically, the Biden administration is paying more attention to what the Israeli government of Netanyahu, the most extremist government that Israel ever had, they are listening to it more than they are listening to their own staffers. The dissent channel inside the State Department, where State Department employees are invited to protest, is really exploding with comments. And some of the State Department staffers have actually gone on Twitter, or now X, to publicly criticize Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Anthony Blinken. And so this huge, massive thing going on, and Blinken has addressed the issue by meeting with some of these people, and I also managed to talk to some of the people in the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security about what's going on, and I was stunned by the ferocity and anger with which very senior people in the State Department staffers I'm glad that Blinken didn't say that if you disagree with the administration's policy, leave, because if he does, he'll be very understaffed. There'll be hundreds and hundreds of people leaving the State Department already. Some seniors have already resigned from the State Department. So you can see there is a rebellion brewing at home. The third observation that I want to make is that one of the reasons why American politicians basically turn their moral compass off when it comes to Israeli issues. Like Biden giving a speech saying, I don't trust the data that Hamas is providing about the Gaza Health Ministry is providing about casualties and numbers of death. And of course, this is a very racist thing to say, that the Palestinians use their children as human shields. You are dehumanizing mothers. So this kind of racist canards made, saying that, oh, these casualties are first generated because the Palestinians are using their children as human shields. And second, that they are lying, has been exposed. Barbara Leaf, you can Google this. Barbara Leaf, one of the Assistant Secretaries of State, in her testimony to the Congress, not only said that the casualties in Gaza are very high, but she feels, and this is the estimate of the State Department, that they are more than what actually the ministry in Gaza is claiming. So what the health ministry in Gaza does is actually, once a dead body appears in the hospital, that is when they register the death. So they have a dead body, they have a number that Israel has issued for the Palestinians. So all the releases that you get from the Gaza Ministry of Health is the name of the person and their Israeli identity number, and this is determined by the death. So if somebody is missing, they don't assume that person is dead. So if you look at the debris in Gaza, there could be many children still under them, dead bodies. And I think that is why Barbara Leaf is saying that eventually we will find out that the number of casualties far exceed what at the moment people expect. So the current count is over 10,000 civilians killed, over 4,300 children dead. We know this. We know their numbers. They are released by the Gaza Ministry of Health. The fourth thing is the U.S. has insisted that there should be no expansion of the conflict, but Israel continues to bomb Lebanon. Provocations are going on. Lebanese rockets being fired by Hezbollah. But there is a new front in the West Bank, and the settlers have been attacking and 2 Palestinian communities have been forced to leave under threats of violence and attacks by settlers. Their communities, they had to leave their homes and their lands. And the Israeli army killed 15 West Bankers, I think, today in Jenin. And overall, 178 Palestinians have been killed in West Bank since October 7. People keep saying, oh, the world will be different without Hamas. You can see how the world will be without Hamas. All you have to look at is West Bank. And you can see there in West Bank, Israelis continuously build illegal settlements, which are a violation of international law. So the rule-based order that Biden keeps talking about does nothing about it. And you can see that the Israeli army and the Israeli settlers both continue to kill Palestinians in large numbers. More Palestinians have been killed in West Bank since October 7 than they have been killed in the last 10-15 years. So you can get an idea of the seriousness of what's happening in West Bank. There are 2 more observations that I want to make. Is one of this is I mean, I've said this before in my YouTube shows, Khanversations on YouTube, and I think on this platform too, that this crisis continues to expose the limits or the importance of the Arab governments, their inability to act together, their inability to take a joint position, and their inability to have any impact at all. I can understand that Israel will just pay zero attention to what the Arabs are going to say. I think the Arabs should realize that Israel treats them like trash. It did not come and participate in the Cairo summit. It is not participating in the Paris summit. And it does not pay any attention to what the Arabs are saying as long as the U.S. continues to stand with it. So the Arabs have more influence with the U.S. than they have with Israel. And I see very little influence or pressure being exerted on the United States by the Arabs. Individually, countries may not be able to do anything, but collectively they can. The only Arab country which seems to be having some say in the whole affair is Qatar, because it is the conduit through which the West and the U.S. and Israel are negotiating with Hamas. There are no direct negotiations, so they're going through either Egypt or through Qatar. And I think that most of the negotiations about the hostages, the 240 apparently now the number is, of the hostages which are held by Hamas, those discussions are going through Qatar. So besides Qatar, none of those countries are beginning to have any impact. Egypt is more concerned about its own national security, its own territorial integrity. The rest of the Arab countries are just trying to pursue their own national interests, defined very narrowly in terms of geoeconomics. To quote MBS, every 1% increase in GDP matters, and he thinks that the Abrahamic Accords will help him become safe from Iran and also increase business. I don't know how increased business goes on. I think what kind of prospects do they have with Israel that they are not already achieving? And then finally, the comment that I want to make is I continue to marvel at this theoretical idea that the world claimed that the world is a multipolar system. I don't see a multipolar system. I only see U.S. aircraft carriers. I only see U.S. nuclear submarines in action. I only see U.S. Secretary of State, Foreign Minister flying all over the world. I only see American president making pronouncements. Maybe 1 or 2 comments from Macron, but other than that, nothing from the other so-called powers. Neither China has done anything, nor Russia, nor India, nor Germany. I mean, they're just towing the line. And so next time you hear people talk about a multipolar world, no, everybody's a regional player. There is only one superpower, and that superpower is behaving in a very inhumane way. U.S. support for Israel is immoral and also contrary to international law, and there is no accountability because it is the only superpower. So I'm going to stop with that, and I will be happy to answer questions after other presentations. Thank you very much.